The Broken Blueprint, Part 3, 1914 and 1915. Deep Apprehensions in 1914. When the March 1914 CME constituency meeting convened, it rather quickly developed into a general discussion of CME problems. J. A. Burden emphasized the need of following out the plans laid down by the Lord, that it is merit and not recognition that counts. We have a work to do and need not ask the world for its sanction. S.E. Wright said if the school was devoted to the medical evangelistic course, more would be accomplished. B.G. Wilkinson said that he was troubled on the question of standards. Are we struggling to meet the standards of the world, or are we not? Minutes of CME Constituency Meeting, March 25, 1914. This was the Benjamin G. Wilkinson, 1872 to 1968, who later authored Truth Triumphant and Our Authorized Bible Vindicated. R. S. Owen reminded us that God's recognition should be first sought, that while we should train some to do the work of a physician, a larger number should be trained as medical evangelists. W. A. Spicer felt that we were to choose between two ways, either to equip the school to meet the standard of the world or not to seek for their recognition. C. W. Flays thought that in view of the nearness of the end of the history of this world, we needed men to go out quickly into the field and bring men to a knowledge of the truth. He spoke of the limited funds and that workers are not being sent out as in times past, due to the elephant-sized annual appropriation to CME. Minutes of CME Constituency Meeting, March 25, 1914. Flays had touched on a special problem. At that time, $10,000 in general church funds collected from the world field were being sent each year to Loma Linda. That's $10,000, an enormous amount of money back then, was being shifted to CME instead of being used to send out and support foreign missionaries. What had we come to? 32 years earlier, the church had been told, if its responsible men seek to reach the world standards, if they copy the plans and methods of other colleges, the frown of God will be upon our school. Our college at Battle Creek stands today in a position that God does not approve. I have been shown the dangers that threatens this important institution. The time has come for me to speak decidedly. The purpose of God in the establishment of our college has been plainly stated. There is an urgent demand for laborers in the gospel field. Young men who design to enter the ministry cannot spend a number of years in obtaining an education. Teachers should have been able to comprehend the situation and adapt their instruction to the wants of this class. Special advantages should have been given them for a brief yet comprehensive study of the branches most needed to fit them for their work. But I have been shown that this has not been accomplished. Testimonies for the Church, Volume 5, page 27, 1882. When, in 1905, Kellogg determined to get the American Medical Missionary College in Battle Creek approved by the AMA, she wrote, "The so-called higher education of the present day is a misnamed deception. All this higher education that is being planned will be extinguished, for it is spurious. The more simple the education of our workers, the less connection they have with the men whom God is not leading, the more will be accomplished. Work will then be done in the simplicity of true godliness, and the old times will be back when, under the Holy Spirit's guidance, thousands were converted in a day. When the truth in its simplicity is lived in every place, then God will work through his angels as he worked on the day of Pentecost." E.G.W., December 4, 1905, Series B, number 7, page 63. Quoted in Lake Union Herald, January 26, 1910. As we have observed, the March 1914 board meeting was a crucial one. Those present came very close to making the right decision. Discouragements shrouded the medical school in 1914. Some of the leading doctors had grave doubts that the institution could survive when the board met, for some of the members had blood in their eyes and a groan in their voice regarding the Loma Linda enterprise. Neff, For God and CME, page 166. But, on the evening of the last day of the session, it was hesitantly voted to keep the accreditation attempt going for another 2 years. Another important event occurred that year. In August, Dr. Ruber resigned from the CME presidency and its intense pressures. An urgent call was given to Dr. Newton G. Evans on the staff at Madison College and the University of Tennessee to fill the vacancy. When Evans arrived and saw the terrible extent of the ongoing crisis, he remembered a friend back in Tennessee, the fighting Irishman, Percy Magan, who was always able to push any project through to the completion. That summer, Elder E. E. Andros, president of the CME board, and Dr. Evans arrived in Nashville to talk with him about coming to Loma Linda, but Magan turned them down. He hesitated to go to CME, for he knew that the men there did not share his concern for true educational and medical self-supporting work. Neff, For God and CME, page 172. A C rating is bestowed. There were few shouts of victory when, in February 1915, church leaders learned that the Council on Education of the AMA had granted CME a C rating. The new leaders in Chicago had far more requirements for them to meet. Wordlings can be hard taskmasters. Oddly enough, Neff says it was granted in 1908, page 164, and some other church historians say the year was 1913. The 1915 crisis over Los Angeles. As early as 1912, President Rubel had been urging the board to open a dispensary in Los Angeles to provide additional opportunities for the students. A small facility was opened on September 29, 1913 in that city. But by 1915, AMA pressures had become so intense that it demanded that, unless the church paid for the construction of an entire hospital in Los Angeles, it probably would never achieve its full accreditation status. By now, well over $500,000 had been spent on accreditation requirements, and no more was required. They discovered it would take $60,000 just to get it started. This required an initial outlay of more than $60,000. Some urged that the large indebtedness already incurred should first be met, but it was pointed out that the standing of the graduates would be imperiled by delay. Robinson, Story of the Health Message, page 394. It should be kept in mind that, years earlier, Ellen White positively stated that we were to build a new hospital in Los Angeles. Seventh Testimonies, page 85. All of our medical facilities, with the exception of very small treatment rooms, were to be located outside the cities in rural areas. For more on this, see the present author's book, The Medical Missionary Manual, which presents the blueprint on this and other matters. When asked, Ellen White had earlier said that Loma Linda should carry on missionary work in Redlands, Los Angeles, and beyond. She never said to build a large clinical hospital there. This is what she had said 10 years earlier about plans for a very small hospital on a hill street in the city. The Lord has at no time guided in the large plans that have been laid for buildings in Los Angeles. He has given light as to how we should move, and yet movements have been made that are contrary to the light and instructions given. The complete plan in regard to the purchase of the Hill Street property was not laid before me till my last visit to Los Angeles. I was then taken to see this property, and as I walked up the hill in front of it, I heard distinctly a voice that I well know. Had this voice said, "This is the right place for God's people to purchase," I should have been greatly admonished. But it said, "Encourage no settlement here of any description. God forbids. My people must get away from such surroundings. This place, is as Sodom for wickedness. The place where my institutions are established must be altogether different. Leave the cities, and like Enoch, come from your retirement to warn the people of the cities. I was afterward instructed that the whole matter was inspired by human wisdom. Men have followed their own wisdom, which is foolishness with God, and which, if they continue to follow it, will lead to results that they do not now see. The spiritual eyesight has been blinded. EGW to Dr. and Mrs. D.H. Kress, January 14, 1910. First Manuscript Releases, page 250. As we learned earlier in this present book, God's plan was for our sanitariums to be located in the country next to our schools. The patients were to be restored to health through natural methods, and this could only be effectively done away from the cities. 7 more AMA demands. The annual council held at Loma Linda in 1915 was even more fiery than the one in 1913. But Daniel spoke to the assembly, trying to reassure them. We must square up to this now. Is there anything else in the world to do but to encourage our young people who contemplate taking a medical course to go to this school? Minutes, Constituency of the College of Medical Evangelists, November 11, 1915. In reply, we would say that yes, there were a few other things the worldwide Advent movement needed to do besides placing such an immense amount of money into the accreditation struggle at Loma Linda. For decades, the spirit of prophecy had called for many small missionary facilities throughout the world instead of a few mammoth ones. That same year, 1915, another important event occurred. Percy Magan agreed to accept an urgent call to come to Loma Linda. To Ed Sutherland's deep sorrow, Percy and Dr. Lillian left, never more to make Madison their home. President Evans had told his associates that Magan was a terrific pusher and could greatly help them. Prior to accepting the call, Magan was asked to accompany Rubel and Evans to the February 1915 meeting in Chicago of the AMA Council on Medical Education. They begged the great men of the world to grant them a B rating, but their petitions were denied. The scene recalls to mind Henry IV standing barefooted in the snow, anxiously pleading for Gregory VII to grant him a dispensation. Great Controversy, page 57. Instead, still more requirements were laid down. Here are 7 demands as officially presented by Dr. Nathan P. Colwell, Secretary of the AMA Council on Medical Education. 1. The clinical faculty of the Los Angeles Division was not satisfactory, as it depended upon teachers from other medical schools. 2. The first and second year courses at Loma Linda were not arranged in a logical manner. 3. The anatomy laboratory was an insult to the college. 4. The pathology laboratory was inadequate. The course in pharmacology was weak. 5. The plan of registration and the provision for student credentials were inadequate. 6. It was unsatisfactory to do part of the work in Loma Linda and part in Los Angeles. 7. It was imperative that CME own and control a 200-bed clinical hospital in Los Angeles. Magan to White, March 3, 1915. That letter was read to Ellen White a little over 4 months before she died. Little wonder she expired. It would appear that the AMA was placing every obstacle they could dream up in the path of our medical school, which was pleading so hard for acceptance by the world. It recalls to mind how many doctrinal modifications we made in the mid-1950s in order to receive the approval from the evangelicals. See our 198-page Evangelical Conferences and Their Aftermath. In the same 8-page letter, Magan made this comment: I do not see that there is a way under heaven unless God works miracles whereby we can get out of this state of affairs. Magan to White, March 3, 1915. It was done, not by miracles from heaven, but by the diversion of enormous amounts of mission funds to Loma Linda, plus immense debt. Contrary to her continued counsel, on December 16, 1916, the foundation was laid for the Ellen G. White Memorial Hospital, and the construction began. Did men think they could counterwork God's commands by the expediency of naming the hospital after the special messenger he sent to tell them not to do it? The original blueprint called for one Blueprint Medical Missionary Training School, using simple methods at Loma Linda. Through slavish submission to AMA requirements, God's plan was changed into a two-hospital, two-medical school arrangement, specializing in drug medication and surgery. And the seriousness of the problem did not ease with the passing of time. It continued for decades. The situation had developed into a gargantuan, two-headed, money-eating monster. Problems. There was a never-ending stream of them, with the medical school on two campuses. On one occasion, President Megan declared, "This whole matter of a divided institution is a very expensive one." Megan to G. H. Curtis, December 18, 1930. Many of the serious items came in pairs: two facilities, two hospital, two nurses training schools, two sets of buildings. Neff, Forgotten CME, page 268. Megan joins the CME staff. In the fall of 1915, Megan was asked to attend the Autumn Council, to be held that year at Loma Linda. He took Dr. Lillian with him so she could get a rest. While there, he for the first time saw the place. Percy Megan, who believed with all his heart in the attainment of full accreditation for Loma Linda, commented on the verbal battles at that session. He afterward wrote that those who did not want the school to be accredited would, if they got their way, doom it to innocuous desuetude, or to maximum of deadly inefficiency. Megan to I. H. Evans, July 14, 1916. As you can see, in addition to having a good vocabulary, Megan had his mind made up. Percy Megan desired CME to obtain legal recognition for God's efficient, superior, simple healing ministry. But that is a self-contradiction. How can those who are in charge of certifying a far lower method understand, much less be willing to approve, a superior method? Therefore, we were told not to seek it. On November 25, a week after the meeting ended, Megan was elected Dean of the Los Angeles Division of the medical school. It was not until a full year later that he found it possible to leave Madison, where conditions were also difficult. But as soon as he permanently moved to Southern California, he hit the ground running. Most of the brethren around here seem to feel it is useless to try to meet the AMA standard. I do not think that any of them have any really clearly defined views as to what the province of Loma Linda Medical College in this old world ought to be. God will have to raise up some men with a vision who will put that thing through in the face of great opposition. Megan to W.C. White, May 23, 1915. Percy Megan was to prove a tireless boaster for full accreditation for CME, regardless of what it might cost. Years later, in heartbroken words, he would recognize his error. Within a week after he joined the CME staff, Megan plunged into a fundraising campaign. The first task was to raise $61,000 for the Los Angeles hospital. Previously a veteran fundraiser for Madison, he traveled, it seems, non-stop to Adventist churches and meetings throughout the nation, constantly trying to raise money. By the summer of 1916, he had gathered pledges for over $40,000. Megan to Paulson, July 3, 1916. And he added, "We have purchased the land for the site, an entire block in the principal part of Los Angeles." Megan to Paulson, July 3, 1916. That was the Boyle Heights purchase. A month before that, he wrote Sutherland, "Dr. Evans was terribly discouraged when I got here. In fact, he was just about ready to quit. But the Lord has helped me to bat some of these fellows over the head, and things are looking up. Megan to Sutherland, May 1, 1916. Daniels had found the man he was looking for, but his work was cut out for him. A related problem was the latest new AMA requirement. It refused to allow physicians who taught at the University of Southern California Medical School to also be members of the CME Los Angeles Hospital faculty, although the physicians were quite willing to do it.